This programme focuses on how to keep UK horticultural produce free from microbial contaminants, the kind of bugs that can cause people's stomach upsets, or worse. It's reassuring to know that the chances of a problem occurring are extremely low. But there is a problem. The knock-on effect to business and the consumer can be very serious. That's why it's very important that within our business we regularly address the public perception of risk and carry out assessments of various farm operations. We need to make sure that we're all aware of our responsibility as growers in ensuring best practice is followed so that complacency doesn't creep in. This issue is particularly important now that we have better protection methods and better understanding of microbial contaminants that can affect our crops.
Although washing crops thoroughly after harvest will reduce the risks of foodborne illness, it does not guarantee removal of all pathogenic microorganisms, and not all crops are routinely washed. That's why other precautions have to be taken. Before we go on to outline the perceived risk, we want to reassure you that people are not becoming ill through current practices. These harmful microorganisms can be destroyed by the ultraviolet rays in sunlight. UV light is currently used for sterilizing water in UK horticulture. They can also be destroyed by high temperatures above 55 degrees Celsius. Microorganisms survive best at a neutral pH. Acid, which has low pH, or alkaline, which has high pH conditions, will speed up the rate of kill. Dry soil conditions also help to reduce the numbers of microorganisms. Pathogenic microorganisms also die out over time. The rate at which this happens depends on environmental conditions. But remember, pathogens such as E. coli can survive for several months following the spreading of farm manures.
In this programme, we will be taking growers and their staff through the various on-farm activities and responsibilities needed to ensure that produce leaving the field is free from any possible microbial contaminants.
Many of the recommendations are common sense and are already in place on farms. Others may take good management practices a step further. These guidelines apply to both conventional and organic growers. We want to provide growers with the information that can be used to assure customers that their produce is safe. The Assured Produce Scheme has produced protocol guidelines for microbial food safety, which are available on the web. In addition, the Chilled Foods Association has produced guidelines for growers. You should also be aware of the guidelines set out by your retail customer. The program is split into two sections. The first is aimed at technical and production managers and business owners. The second is a shorter section designed specifically for staff. You're advised to view the program from start to finish and then review the practices within your own particular areas of business.
These then need to be ongoing practices within your business. We all need to show that crop production is being continually planned with product safety in mind.
Throughout the program, the information is split into 4 key areas: risk assessment, planning, strengthening good agricultural practice, and keeping records. Risk assessment covers ascertaining the crop production practices that have the potential to present a future microbiological risk. Planning involves developing an action plan for the practices that have been identified as posing a potential medium or high risk. Identifying potential risk areas and developing plans will only work if used alongside good agricultural practice on a farm. When it comes to food safety, keeping records of all farm operations is very important. Keep records of your microbial risk assessments to show your customers that you are doing the right thing. If you haven't got written records, how can you show your customer that it has happened?
The areas highlighted in this programme could all be potential sources of microbial contamination or build-up.
The level of risk will depend on the crop being grown, the environment and production methods used, and how the crop is consumed. These can only be established by a risk assessment being carried out on each crop or production site. For each area, we will follow this simple format to make sure that no gaps occur and to avoid problems. It's vitally important that we all make sure that we are keeping it clean. All main UK crops have been categorised into 3 risk areas. Category 1 includes high-risk crops. These can be eaten raw and don't have a protective skin. They may also be perceived by some to have a significant risk or history of pathogen contamination. Category 2 covers medium-risk crops. These can be eaten raw and either have a protective skin or grow clear of the ground. They have no significant history of pathogen contamination. Category 3 includes low-risk crops, which are those that are cooked before eating. Having assessed the crops, the next stage is to develop an action plan to reduce risks. For higher-risk crops, the plan should be embodied in a hazard analysis and control principles system. For medium and high-risk crops, growers should be aware of the perceived risks. Carefully plan all aspects of the crop program and husbandry to minimize any potential risk and to ensure maintenance of good agricultural practice. Strengthen good agricultural practice. Keep clear records of all your activities in terms of assessing risks, plans, and the actions you have taken to improve good agricultural practice. It's important to know the previous history of the use of the field, preferably for the last 5 years. You should also check up on the history of adjoining sites. Risk assessment should be used to identify potential microbial, chemical, and physical hazards that could arise. It should include consideration of use for crop production, animal grazing, application of animal manures and sewerage sludge, hazardous waste site, such as industrial wastes, abattoir waste, manure piles, and history of flooding. Consider access of farm and wild animals to the site. These are potential routes of fecal contamination of the soil. The risk of contamination from the field history must be evaluated. You should also be aware of the treatments applied to neighbouring fields, as slurry spray can be carried by a moderate wind for up to 1 kilometre. Water is a potential source of food-borne pathogens. That's why any practices or processes involving water should be evaluated in terms of potential contamination. It is vitally important to be aware of all the various water sources on your land. In general, the perceived risk of contamination is greatest for surface water supplies, less for groundwater supplies, and significantly less for mains water supplies. But these risks need to be interpreted in context, as water abstracted from rivers and streams is cleaner now than it has been for many generations. All water sources and extraction points, including internal pipework, must be known and mapped as part of your record keeping. Check out the DEFRA ADAS Irrigation Best Practices Guidance for details. In mapping water sources, look for potential sources of contamination from farm animals, rodents, birds or pets with access to water. The microbial and chemical quality of the source water should be assessed together with its suitability for the intended use. Measures must be planned and implemented to prevent or minimize contamination from other sources, such as livestock, other animals, runoff from heavy rainfall, and excess irrigation. Remember, water from animal or human sewage effluent must never be used in any aspect of crop production. Water is used in numerous field and glasshouse operations for irrigation, spraying, cooling, and cleaning. Measures should be put in place to ensure that water quality is appropriate for its intended use. The time between irrigation and crop harvesting should be maximized. Remember, ultraviolet light and sunlight kills contaminants. For crops with a perceived high risk, water quality will need to be greater for overhead spray irrigation than for drip irrigation or flood irrigation. The potential for contaminated water to come into contact with the edible portion of the product should be minimized by good practice, such as drip, furrow, or underground irrigation, where this is agronomically and economically possible. Crops with a relatively large surface area that have leaves which can trap water carry extra risks, and it may also be necessary to increase the time between application and harvest. Growers should arrange for periodic testing of water supply for microbial contamination. The frequency of testing will be based on risk assessment. Suggested minimum testing frequencies are annually with mains water and quarterly with groundwater. And for open water, at least 3 times during the season, once at planting, then at peak use, and once again at harvest. The guidelines on water testing procedures and analysis are available online. Always wear clean surgical gloves. Only use sterile sample bottles supplied by the laboratory carrying out the water analysis. The minimum sample required is 500 milliliters. The sampling point should be visibly clean. Clean off any soiling from the sampling point, but do not disinfect it before taking the sample. This ensures that the results reflect the condition of the water as you are using it. Allow the water to run through the sampling point at a uniform rate for a few seconds before taking the sample. Hold the sample bottle in one hand and remove the stopper or cap with the other. Take care not to touch the top of the bottle or any part of the stopper or cap which comes into contact with the sample water. Do not put the cap or stopper down on the ground or any other surface. Collect the water sample in the bottle, avoiding splashing, and leave a small air gap at the top. Replace the cap or stopper, again taking care not to touch the top of the bottle or parts of the cap or stopper which come into contact with the water sample. If you accidentally contaminate the bottle, use a new sterile one to collect a fresh sample. You should deliver sample bottles to the laboratory and have them analyzed as quickly as possible. Within 6 hours should be the target. Plan ahead to make sure you take samples when you can transport them quickly and the laboratory is open and ready to analyze them. Keep the samples cool. Use cool boxes, ice packs, or refrigerated vehicles. Keep any containers you use to transport samples clean to avoid contamination of the sample bottles. In exceptional circumstances, you may keep samples in a cool, dark place between 2 to 10 degrees centigrade for a maximum of 48 hours before they are analyzed. Farmyard manure and slurry are valuable sources of plant nutrients and organic matter which can assist in maintaining soil fertility. However, in their raw state, farmyard manure and slurry contain a high proportion of fecal-borne pathogens. Remember, raw farmyard manure cannot be used in a crop rotation for 12 months before drilling or planting a high or medium-risk crop. The numbers and type of pathogens present can depend on the source of the manure, the treatment regime, such as composting and storage time, the health of the livestock, and the management practices between production and land spreading. Farmyard manure should be actively composted for at least 3 months before use. Growers purchasing manure should take account of the source and treatment it may have undergone before use. The interval between manure application and produce harvest should be maximized to minimize risk of contaminating produce. Avoid spraying slurry within 1 kilometer upwind or on fields adjacent to crops, as microorganisms can be carried on the wind. One way to avoid this is to use the new generation of spreaders which place slurry on soil surface. You should ensure that there is a 12-month gap between livestock last grazing in the field and harvest of a ready-to-eat crop. And where possible, domestic animals and wildlife should be excluded from cropping areas. Good personal health and hygiene practices are important for the production of safe, fresh fruits and vegetables. Just think about it for a minute. What you're eating has been handled by other people, sometimes many other people. How would you like it if the person who cooked your dinner didn't wash their hands? That's why you must make sure you educate everyone about the importance of using the toilet facilities and proper hand washing after using the toilet, before starting or returning to work, before and after eating or smoking. Toilets must be available for all staff, ideally within 5 minutes or a quarter of a mile of the site of production for harvest staff who are handling produce that will not be cooked. Toilets should be cleaned and sanitized on a regular basis and have hand-washing facilities. If your staff find that your toilets are not properly equipped with non-scented soap and paper towels or are not regularly cleaned, ask them to report it to you immediately. It's your responsibility to make sure the facilities are regularly and efficiently maintained. Keep in close contact with your staff and make sure that all illnesses are reported. A formal return-to-work procedure after ill health should be developed. If one of your members of staff has a stomach upset or is ill, you should move them to other non-harvesting duties where they won't come into direct contact with the produce. All food handling staff must be trained in basic food hygiene standards and records kept. This must include all seasonal, casual, permanent, and management staff. Staff and visitors must use facilities and must not eat, drink, spit, or smoke within cropping areas. There is a special section on this DVD designed for staff which goes through the key points on personal hygiene. Make sure everyone watches it closely. All machinery and equipment, such as knives and scissors and harvest crates, must be kept clean and routinely sanitized when they are used on crops eaten raw. All harvesting equipment must be cleaned on a planned basis, based on risk assessment. Use a detergent to remove all visible debris and dirt, followed by a non-scented food-grade sanitizer. Bins, other crop handling equipment and packaging materials should not be stored in any area where they can be contaminated by wildlife, such as rodents or birds. Packaging materials must be kept clean and free from contamination at all times. All Category 1 products must be cooled rapidly to minimize the risk of microbial growth. All facilities should have an adequate program for pest and insect control. Remember, this is the start of the food production chain. Hygiene starts here. Pick Your Own growers need to provide toilets and washing facilities for staff and for customers, and they need to encourage people to use them. Clearly display signs to remind people of the importance of hand washing, and ask all customers to wash their hands before they begin to pick. Don't allow customers to bring their dogs into cropping fields. The fields are for food, not for dog walking.
This programme was designed as a guideline to growers on how to reduce the risks of microbiological contamination of ready-to-eat crops. Follow the guidelines we have suggested and make sure you focus on risk assessment, planning, strengthening good agricultural practice and recording your actions. As we said at the start, the perceived risks of contamination are actually far greater than reported incidents. But if a problem does occur, it could seriously affect your business and damage your relationship with your customers. By following our guidelines, you can assure your customers that you have done all you can to make sure their produce is safe.
This short program is designed to remind everyone who works in the horticulture industry of the importance of personal hygiene. Whether you are picking, packing, or handling fresh food, your hands will come into constant contact with the food. If they are not clean, germs can be transferred from your hands onto the fruit and vegetables. Do not urinate in the fields. Always use the facilities provided. If you find that your facilities are not properly equipped with soap and paper towels or are not regularly cleaned, report it to your supervisor. Remember, dirty hands can contaminate fresh fruit and vegetables with harmful microbes. Would you want to eat food that had been prepared by someone who hadn't washed their hands? You should wash your hands after using the toilet, before starting or returning to work, before and after eating or smoking. The best way to wash is to wet your hands with clean, warm water, apply soap, and work up a lather. Rub them together for at least 30 seconds. Clean under your nails and between your fingers like this. Rub the fingertips of each hand in suds on the palm of the opposite hand. Rinse your hands under clean running water and dry them carefully with a single-use towel. If you don't feel well, you should not handle food. People who have symptoms of nausea, vomiting, or stomach upsets can transmit harmful microorganisms to fruits and vegetables. Tell your supervisor if you have a stomach upset or feel ill.
Open or infected wounds, blisters, or cuts can also transmit harmful pathogens to the crops. So if you have a cut, remember to stick a blue plaster on it before you start work. It's not difficult. All you have to do is to follow these simple guidelines to make sure you are playing your part in keeping it clean.